fans, to another exclusive interview here on Clemson Sports Talk. Yesterday, we sat down with Mike Farrell, the godfather of recruiting and a national recruiting analyst, to talk about the landscape of college football recruiting and, of course, what he sees from your Clemson Tigers. It is the show that shakes the Southland Clemson Sports Talk, and we're excited today to be joined by Mike Farrell from Mike Farrell Sports, joining us here on the program. And Mike, you know, people have called you the godfather of recruiting, and this is a new era with NIL and the transfer portal and all of that. What's been your take on sort of the seismic shift, if you will, that we've seen in college football over the past couple of seasons?
It takes getting used to. I mean, I've been doing this for a very long time, and when you grow up on, Tony Dorsett, Dan Marino, and more so towards the Miami teams that were dominant in Nebraska, and then I started covering college football and recruiting, right as the Canes and Ohio State were playing a national championship, and it's just different now. I used to have a great respect for the recruiting process and what coaches did and how hard they worked, and as I furthered my career, I learned in being a recruiting analyst, you sort of mirror their hours, and the travel. And it's a grind. It's 365. It's phone's always on. You're always on call. Any commitment or news could come at any point in time, and every weekend is going to see different kids. And now with NIL, all of that's kind of been erased as far as the respect that coaches should get for the recruiting efforts. I mean, we had Jaden Rashada commit to Miami, this weekend, and not one mention of, what a great job that was by the staff at Miami and Mario Cristobal. Everything was talked about dollars and cents. And that kind of bothers me a little bit. Yeah. And maybe I'm an old curmudgeon about it, but I still think there's a ton of work that goes into the recruiting process, and it's just being overshadowed by honestly made up numbers. I mean, these NIL numbers are just inflated beyond belief.
You know what, Mike? I'm glad you're a curmudgeon about it, because I am too, and I'm not that old. You're not that old, but the fact of the matter remains, for me, college football has always been different from professional, and while NIL doesn't change that, these conversations that you mentioned, the numbers, the inflated, sure, but I think that's what people dislike about where we are today in this sport.
Yeah, and listen, everybody wants these kids to sacrifice for free, and they want they get a scholarship and free education and all that stuff. And listen, we're in a world now where things change constantly, and there's no argument against kids getting paid, as athletic departments reel in millions and millions of dollars, and you see some of these TV deals. So it's a fine balance between, I want these kids to get as much money as possible, good for them, free enterprise, especially the kids on the roster. The recruits, for sure, that's speculation. You don't know if the kid's going to be great or going to be average, but I don't like the numbers being made up, because, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there was a $9.5 million deal, or maybe the Tennessee QB got $8 million. I don't know, but I've talked to enough people to know that those numbers seem to outrage people in the know and people who are really behind the scenes when it comes to NIL, and they're just laughing at these reports. And people just sort of take this information. It's almost like a coach telling me, I got a kid, he's the next Tom Brady. Okay, coach, I'm going to just type that out. I'm going to give him 5 stars, and I'm going to believe you. I'm not going to look at his film. I'm not going to see him in person. I'm just going to say, next Tom Brady, 5 stars. Like, you have to do your due diligence and look into this stuff. But that's the problem. When you ask people for receipts, there are none. So what do you believe? It's just that kind of murky world that I think people are turned off about. And they're turned off about, kids potentially making more money than NFL football players. And free agency goes with that, unlimited free agency of the transfer portal, on and on. But how do you stop it? I mean, I don't have the solutions. I just can point out the problems.
He's on Twitter at MFarrellSports, and you can also check out his website, Mike Farrell Sports. So, Mike, from that instance, we'll talk about Clemson's 2023 recruiting class here momentarily. But is there still a place for programs that maybe aren't putting the emphasis on NIL and focusing more on the whole player, the way that Clemson seems to be doing it at this point, maybe by comparison to some of their contemporaries?
It's it's the dinosaur effect. I mean, if they continue to do that, and I'm not saying Clemson does that. I'm sure they have an NIL collective, and I'm sure there's opportunities for kids to go to Clemson. Clemson's got this reputation from the outside looking in as a wholesome Brady Bunch family type of thing, right? Um, we don't really use the transfer portal. Our transfer portal's in the locker room. You come here for the right reasons, all that stuff, and that's great. But there was a time where the T-Rex was terrifying the planet and was in charge of everybody, and then got wiped off the planet like that. Just you have to adjust. And I think that's the difficult, issue for Dabo and his staff right now. The recruiting class is terrific. It's there's loaded with 4 stars and a couple of guys you could argue for 5 stars. Can they last this way? Can they, lose players to the portal and not gain them? It's really Clemson's probably the epicenter of that discussion. Ohio State's not. We know they're doing NIL deals. Notre Dame maybe, but they have a bigger status nationally. Clemson's the test project here to see if you can survive without the big flashy NIL in the portal.
What's wild to me about what we've seen over the past couple of weeks with recruiting, Mike, and I know as a guy who's covered it for as many years as you have, this is something you probably never thought you'd see collegiately, but the things like at Louisville with Lamborghinis on the football field and eating food and jets, like, to me, I can't understand. Like, I have a 12-year-old about to be 13. I know that one day, if he's fortunate enough, he'll be recruited to play some sport collegiately, but my thought process as a parent is, what are we focused on, right? Like, at what point is that something that parents look at and go, hold on, my kid's still 18. I'm not sure this is what I want to promote to them as they arrive on campus.
Depends on the parents. It depends on, there's definitely different lifestyles, different cultures, different, attitudes towards this. You're in a generation now of content creators and TikTok stars and YouTube stars and people, that are making money off of their name, image, likeness in other areas. And they have a quote unquote brand. And, that brand could be, I'm the hard worker who's going to be in the gym and the first one in to practice and the last one out. Or it could be, I'm Slick Rick, who's the cool guy with the shades and the Lamborghini. It's really depending upon what brand you want to portray. And it's similar to the NFL. I mean, I mentioned Tom Brady. We see what his legacy is. We see how he handles himself. And then you've got Antonio Brown, great player, probably a Hall of Famer. Mike Tomlin just said he could retire as a Steeler and go into the Hall of Fame, blah, blah, blah. Different approaches, to who they are and how they became great players. One's flash, and they can go back to the Terrell Owens of the world. And it's really, now as a parent, I wouldn't want that. I want to know, what are you going to do to take care of my kid, not put him in a Lamborghini. But there are, parents and guardians out there that's important to. And I guess we're in a non-judgment world. It's weird for me because I remember the days when, the kids would come out to the smoke on the field and then have their name up on the stadium for their official visits. And the NCAA said, no, that's too flashy. Right. You're not allowed to do that. So let's stop that. And now we're just in the polar opposite, where if you don't have a Lamborghini on the football field, or if you're not taking a kid around in a Bugatti, you're just lame. And it's changed like that, like so fast. It's changed in 1 year. So I think we're all just sort of getting used to it. And I think we're 5 years away from figuring out what NIL is. I think all this is like just guesswork.
Mike Farrell joining us here on the program today, talking about recruiting, the nature of it, the changes in it. And Mike, before we talk a little bit about Clemson's class, I do want to ask you, last week, the most notable name maybe in the 2023 class, Arch Manning, committed to Texas. Your thoughts on Manning as a player, and how much of the hype and everything built around him has come simply from his last name?
I think it's mostly from his last name. I mean, if he grew up with the last name Smith or Williams, and he'd be a talented kid, but nobody would really be focused on him at the age of 8, or the age of 12, or now heading into his senior year of high school. The focus is there because your grandfather was a legendary player, and your uncle's legendary players, and that's just you could argue that's the first name in NFL football that comes to mind as far as family is concerned. And, he gets a little bit overrated because of that. I mean, the competition isn't that great. He's an athletic kid. He's got the arm talent. He could definitely sling it. But I think, the last name has sort of taken him from that 4-star to mega 5-star status that he's gained now. And it's going to help Texas for sure. I mean, we've already seen 5 kids commit since Arch committed there. It's going to be bad for him because there's no way he can live up to it. There's just absolutely no way. I mean, now look at Trevor Lawrence, right? Trevor Lawrence came in, and I did my 5 most hyped on my social media, right, ever.
Yeah.
Arch Manning was 1, Jimmy Clausen, you got the Ron Pauluses of the world, and Tim Tebow's, and I had Trevor at 5. Covered Trevor in high school, knew him well. He came in, won a national championship as a true freshman. But he never won a Heisman. He didn't win it again. And then after he won the national championship, every bad game he had or average game he had started to be magnified. Like, oh, what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence? And this kid won a national championship, went on to be a number 1 pick overall, and he's just still under amazing scrutiny. And he can never live up to what, the expectations were. And Arch, if he turns out as good as Trevor, it would be a miracle. And even if he does, he's going to, underwhelm some people.
It's funny you bring that up, because when I talked about programs where I thought, for Arch Manning, and this was prior to Christopher Xena committing to Clemson, this was back when Arch was taking his visits last year. One of the things that I kind of focused on was exactly what you said. I said, look, in my life covering this sport, one of the biggest names has been Trevor Lawrence, and he came through, delivered a national title, had all this hype, ends up being maybe one of the players that saved the 2020 season with a tweet saying, hey, we want to play. I mean, you kind of go on and on into that. And I said, if you've got a guy like Arch Manning coming into your program, you're going to want to have been a program that's kind of directed a similar type player through the process of being a collegiate athlete. Steve Sarkisian and his staff, I mean, there's going to be a lot of pressure on them to succeed with Arch Manning, and not just on the field, but off the field, making sure he's making good decisions. And I thought that was one reason that Clemson, in my opinion, would have been a great spot for him. I mean, whether he goes to Texas or Georgia, wherever, is neither here nor there for me. But the point was, a similar player, Mike, had kind of been groomed, so to speak, in Tiger Town recently.
Yeah. And, I think he was very interested in Clemson. He took the visit, and it really honestly came down like Clemson to the feel for the city, and what I've been told is, Arch he doesn't want a big bright light city, but he wants a college city. He doesn't want to be the center of attention in a small town. He wants to blend in as a regular college athlete. And a lot of this went into what he liked about Athens and what he liked about, Austin. Tuscaloosa, I don't think he was ever going to go to Alabama, honestly. And the weird part about that is there's the Ole Miss thing. And I think we don't have time to get into it now, but Alabama's going to be playing Ole Miss. And that's just that family and Ole Miss. It's just something about it is a little bit off. But Clemson would have been a good opportunity for him. But I will say this. I think, the 3 finalists all won here. Georgia won because they don't have to deal with this Manning stuff, right? Alabama won because they don't have to deal with this Manning stuff, all the pressure and accolades and all that stuff. Texas won because they need this Manning stuff. So everybody kind of won here. we'll just see how it plays out on the field because the expectations are there. And there's a guy named Quinn Ewers who's there who is pretty hyped up himself, and that's going to have to play out too.
Mike Farrell, MikeFarrellSports.com is his website, joining us here on the program today. So I mentioned Xena. Give us your comparisons maybe of what Tiger fans can see from him in a couple of years.
I like him. I think this class is loaded at quarterback. I mean, really, there were some down years over the years at quarterback that I've seen. And then you've got, the years where it's a little top heavy, like Bryce and DJ that year. This year, you could make a case for as many as 5 players to be 5-star quarterbacks. And Xena is one of those guys. He's a big kid. He's sort of an aw-shucks type, so he's perfect fit for Clemson. He's not, brash. He's not cocky. You've got more flair coming from the Dante Moores and Nico Oliveas and Malachi Nelsons than you do from him. And, man, he's got really good field vision. He doesn't panic. It's not Trevor Lawrence. I'm not going to see, I don't think, a Trevor Lawrence again. He's the best I've seen at the high school level at quarterback, and I'm not sure I'm going to see anybody that good and that polished and that ready to come in. But he's got that mentality, like I know Deshaun Watson in the news these days for all the wrong reasons, but when he headed into Clemson, he had that mentality where it's like, I'm a teammate. I'm one of the guys, and you knock me down, I'm going to get up and I'm going to be angry about it, and I'm going to make you lose. And that's what Trevor Lawrence did. Xena's got a little bit of that too.
Taking a look at some other names in the class, is there anyone in particular that stands out? I mean, listen, Avion Terrell committed, Mike, and you know this, the Tigers ran off 11 commits in, like 20 days or less. What do you see from this group right now, and who else stands out maybe on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously they've got a tremendous defensive line tradition, and they've got, Brian Brzee and Miles Murphy and others. I mean, it is a very deep defensive line for them. So to continue recruiting elite guys like Victor Burley, from Georgia, AJ Hoffler from Georgia, I mean, that's their bread and butter. They need to be able to go into that state and make hay and take some guys away. But on the defensive side of things, to get a Terrell, where his brother had so much success, to get a Brandon Stroger, who's a skinny kid, a tall drink of water though, 6'2" with arms forever, or Kylan Webb, that's the back end stuff that maybe last year they were lacking a little bit. Yes, they had a great corner, but they didn't have that continuity and that depth at defensive back. And I think that's really what I'm focused on in this class is them getting better on the backside.
Again, his website, MikeFarrellSports.com, on Twitter at MFarrellSports. Mike, thank you so much for your insight into the program, and best of luck to you as you continue this new venture, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
All right, thanks.
So there you go, our interview with Mike Farrell. If you like that video, click one of these, either, I guess, this way or that way, and be a part of the show that shakes the Southland each and every afternoon on Fox Sports Radio 1400 the Midlands, around the world on the iHeart Radio app.